Okay, good morning. We're going to do lesson 16B today. Also, this time of year, make sure you're being healthy by using some good sanitizer and washing your hands. Just came in contact with a lot of people there, probably should. It's very strong. Get going for today. All right, good morning. Hope you're tracking this week. Remember, no reaction quiz this week, but we have chapter 15 and 16 quizzes that will be due by next Monday by 10 p.m. Those of you that will be just starting here, don't feel overwhelmed. You'll be able to get caught up. We're not going at a quick, crazy pace, but I do have a plan, and I'll get some information out there if you still need some more information. Okay. So, transformation of the West. We talked about yesterday the economic boom and the transformation from the railroads, some new innovations. We talked about the rise of the big corporations. Well, in the West, things are starting to be changed. This is where we ended yesterday. Cowboys and the corporate West. In the 1880s was the cattle kingdom age. This is when you had cattle just everywhere in the West. Cattle drives declined as more and more land was fenced off, but this is where the towns of like Sedalia, Dodge City, even Kansas City is going to get some input from this, are going to start to emerge as people or cattle ranchers drive their cattle to the railheads. And that is to move them to places such as Chicago where they can be slaughtered and sold. It was a very lucrative business. But by 1890, a higher percentage of its population, though, in the country was starting to move and live in cities. But this will be the trend that still is going on to this day. Now, the irony about this when I say live in cities is we don't live in downtown cities anymore. We tend to live on the outskirts of cities like suburbs, and that's a whole new phenomenon that we'll talk about later. But people tend to be more gravitating towards population centers today. Large corporate enterprises appeared throughout the West, often controlled back east. You're going to have large farms, corporations that will be owned by rich men in the east. This is also where you get the legend and the birth, a little bit of the American cowboy that we often think about. One other group that is not in the book, and I really don't think it has a place to be talked about anywhere, is during this period. This is the period that we also have the rise of an individual in Missouri history called Jesse James, and he's really born out of this era of. I think Mr. Moore just let one go over there. He was just, I don't know if you heard it on the video. Oh. Anyway, but in the 1880s, 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, this is the heyday of Jesse James, and he's going to pick on a lot of these stagecoaches, people moving out west. That have a lot of money. We don't like today. We have armored cars to move money. Back then, money was moved in stagecoaches with a couple lawmen or people with guns. Obviously, they could be easily overpowered. The Chinese presence, they came to work in the mines, factories, and railroad construction in the West. Many were unattached men, but several families came later on. By 1880, 105,000 lived in the United States, and that was predominantly in the California region. 3/4 lived in California, where they made up over half the state's farm workers. And a lot of these Chinamen are going to leave China because of instability in China at this point. In the 1860s, there's what's called the Taiping Rebellion, and literally I think 12 million people will die in this 12 to 15 year rebellion in China. So there's going to be and they're not very rich in China at this point, there's going to be a desire for people to spread out and leave from China. So the Chinese will naturally kind of not flock, but kind of move towards the United States. Okay. Here's a photo of some cowboys, ranchers. If you're on your phone, if you slide, it's just right off Transformation of the West, number 3. You can see what the get-up was. It's not as much like the movies paints it, but this is the more realistic, practical approach. One thing to note about cowboys too, or ranchers, we have our own in this area over by Bilby Ranch Lake. There used to be a ranch over there, and if you've seen ever the ranch and what they had, it's actually kind of cool to see it. But Not an easy lifestyle, obviously. And it could be a wide group and diverse group at that. Transformation of the West, number 4. Conflict on the Mormon frontier. In the previous class, and we talked about a group called the Mormons. They were founded by a guy named Joseph Smith. And if I remember the legend correctly, he supposedly had a revelation from God, found the golden plates. I think it was the angel Mordecai, if I remember right. Anyway, they essentially believe all of the Bible with the addition of the Book of Mormon, which details Joseph Smith's revelation. But either case, it is not a popular religion in the East. They will be pushed further and further west. Mormons were often hated, ostracized, and not, in some cases, killed. In fact, in the state of Missouri, they will be banned completely. There'll be a law in the 1840s as they moved further and further west that was, and it was on the books until recent years, you could legally kill a Mormon. So that being said, they left Missouri and went further west, and they'll settle in the Utah territory that will later become a state. But they had moved to Utah to avoid persecution. They were outside the United States at this point, and this was known as the Mormon land. In 1857, President James Buchanan removed Brigham Young as governor. Young refused to comply, and federal troops were sent into the area until the beginning of the Civil War, and they will be called out from the Civil War. So basically, they were outside the United States, but then they will become a U.S. territory. Brigham Young was appointed as governor, then he'll be removed. Brigham Young was the appointed leader after Joseph Smith's death, and this is where we get the name for BYU University. There's going to be conflict. But when the Civil War erupts, federal troops will be pulled out, and it will kind of not stabilize, but it'll be a lot less contentious. In 1857, a group of Mormons attacked a wagon of 100 travelers and killed them. 20 years later, only one member was convicted of the murder or murders that were occurred over this. So the Mormon territory was not a place you would often travel to. Today, we can travel to Salt Lake City to go skiing. The Olympics were there in 2002, I think it was. Utah is a very beautiful state. And you can actively engage with Mormons today. But at this point in U.S. history, it was a lot more contentious. One of the big things that was a contention was not necessarily their crazy, I'm not going to say crazy, that's bad, but their difference in the regular Christianity was their use of polygamy, which is multiple wives. And that has been contentious for years. The more modern Mormon church, most do not. I think it's actually not allowed in the current church. There is offshoots that still practice it, but that was a big issue that really didn't sit well with many. Interestingly enough, on the Mormon subject, I was reading a Sherlock Holmes story. One of his first actual stories that Sherlock Holmes is an account of Brigham Young and the Mormons and how they treated outsiders. And it was from the perspective of a British man. I mean, it's in America. It takes place in America. It's an American, the story details, but it's done from the perspective written by a British person looking at the Mormons. Very fascinating. And the Mormons are not looked very kindly by Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. When he wrote the short story, that leads up to a mystery in London. He was very negative on the Mormons. So it's very interesting to look through the lens of another countryman about the Mormons at this period. So it's an interesting read. I can't remember the name of it, but it's an interesting story if you like Sherlock Holmes-like novels. It's one of the early short stories, short books actually, about Sherlock Holmes. Now, the subjugation of the Plains Indians. This is a more contentious thing besides the Mormons, even more so. Transcontinental Railroad brought a final change to the Indian world. As the Indians have been pushed further west, as the Transcontinental Railroad be completed, Indians now faced the reality they were finally going to be completely subdued. Conflict arose more and more as settlers moved onto Indians' lands. There'll be grants, peace policy, but it's not necessarily going to be super effective. In the end, went to destroy Indian way of life, and they're going to focus on the buffalo, what we'll get to a little bit later. But the Indians, of the reality at this point, are going to be pushed to the brink. And the sad reality is they're going to be pushed to reservations, and their population is going to continue to decline. In fact, Indians will not gain full American citizenship until the 1920s. Transformation of the West, number 5. Let me be a free man. Army's relentless attacks broke the power of one tribe after another. The primary role of the military at this point was to break the Indians. O.O. Howard pursued the Nez Perce Indians on a 1,700-mile chase. They were trying to get to Canada. There was refuge in Canada for the Nez Perce, but they were caught, they were captured, and they were sent to Oklahoma. Chief Joseph gave a powerful speech in Washington, but ultimately to no avail. The Battle of Little Bighorn will occur. The most famous event about the Battle of Little Bighorn is a massacre of, anyone remember who the massacre of? Custer. General, or Colonel, I think it was, I don't think he ever made General. George S. Custer will be killed. Little Bighorn, I think it's Crazy Horse that isolates him, and they slaughter and they scalp every single one of them. But this was the lone exception to many, many Army victories or American victories over the Indians. Remaking Indian life, abolish treaties, and work to assimilate the Indians into American ways. But obviously this is going to just be a disaster. We obviously know the story of the Indians. But the point of this is, as we move west, America is changing. Indians are going to be reduced to the edges of America. Even to this day, if you go, I've never actually visited one, my wife has, and she says it's a very dark place, but many reservations are places you don't want to go. Suicide's rampant, drinking's rampant, poverty's rampant. It is not good places. And so, even to this day, Indians are pushed to the brink or the edges of American society. In fact, I think it's the first, I know they're the first women Indians, but I think the first 2 Indians, or from tribes, have actually been won congressional seats in Congress. One from Kansas. So we're in the 21st century, 2019, and it's still a struggle to get past the old ways and old traditions of long ago, or even where Indians' role is today. Okay, transformation of the American West, number 6. This is the last slide for this segment of notes. We'll keep going today, but this is for this section. The Dawes Act and Wounded Knee. The Dawes Act broke up the land of nearly all tribes into small parcels to be distributed to Indian families, with the remainder auctioned off to white purchasers. This was supposed to be similar to the Homestead Act, designed to get Indians to new lands that they could call their own that would be undisturbed. But 1.5 million of acres were taken from the Native Americans, was taken and given to white people. Some Indians saw solace in the ghost dance, which was a traditional dance. It freaked white people out at this point. The ghost dance was actually banned by many military units or people that came in contact with the Indians because it freaked them out. And in fact, there will be a giant ghost dance at Wounded Knee, which will probably provoke why the massacre will happen at Wounded Knee. December 20th, 1890, Army opened fire, killing anywhere from 150 to 200 Indians, mostly women and children, attending a ghost dance. Marked the end of 4th century's armed conflict, and this is the last significant massacre, battle, not even a battle, of Indians. And at this point, stuff will change. That being said, this was a horrible, horrible incident. I'm not for sure if anyone was held accountable for it. The point of this is just not understanding a traditional Indian tradition. Myth, reality, and the Wild West. So, one thing to note as we get through this transformation of the West, a new image, a lawless place ruled by cowboys and Indians will come up. This will be the best time that you will see this really manifest is the 1950s with the movies or TV shows like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and so forth. They often call them the, what's the term? Can't think of it right now, but all these short little movies, TV shows, segments that are made in the 50s that really depict this. Now, they were not really accurate, but that image of cowboys and Indians is going to manifest. And so much so, one of the movies that, if you've seen it, Hunt for Red October from the 1980s, other countries like the Soviet Union who we were in conflict with said, I want to go to Montana and see a cowboy, or be a cowboy, wear a cowboy hat. Like, American manifestation as a cowboy, this lawless renegade, is going to be an image that we even still to this day have on our backs. It was also an image of a violent yet romantic frontier world, later become a staple of Hollywood, as I just mentioned. It's kind of alluring, the wild, living out in the rocks, the mountains, not knowing what's going to happen. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show will come and will be a huge popularization of some of these ideas, and it's going to shape some opinions accurately and inaccurately. Buffalo Bill had been part of the solution to basically bring an end to the Indians. One of the policies was the hunting to near extinction of the buffalo. And Buffalo Bill got his name partly because he was a buffalo hunter. Another sad policy that ultimately now has been reversed to some degree. There used to be buffalo roaming the whole plains. I think there was, I don't know if buffalo came in our area. Mostly they've been more up in the Dakotas, Nebraska. One of the Lewis and Clark accounts, Aiden, if I don't remember, you read it from the book in the fall, Lewis and Clark heard a loud roar from the Missouri River, and they actually disembarked from the river, climbed the bluff, and they saw a herd of buffalo running across. Which is that'd be pretty cool to see. You're actually on the river, hear this loud roar, wondering what it is, but see just thousands of buffalo running. My luck, I'd find the bull and he'd run and kill me, but. Now, Buffalo Bill's show tried to capture some of these images. Struggle of normal people played no role in these images. It was all not cartoonized, but basically Hollywoodized before Hollywood existed. Sterilized, there we go. Multiracial, multi-ethnic population also disappeared. This was all really from the perspective of the whites. Buffalo Bill is not necessarily a bad person. He just benefited from the period. He took the show on the road, made lots of money. I think he actually even went to England. But this is the image that American projects at this point. The cowboy, Buffalo Bill. He is going to have a huge impact culturally and obviously pop culture for years to come on America. His Wild West show, this short video will give a little bit more about it. Those of you watching the PowerPoint, we're going to watch this video for a minute. You can just click on it in the video. The link should work. Oh. Buffalo Bill is buried just outside of Denver, Colorado. Has anyone been there? I've been there once. It's literally on top of a mountain that overlooks Denver. But like I said, not really a bad guy. Benefited from his acts of hunting buffalo, and then he did incorporate some Indians in the show, but the Indian was always portrayed as a savage. Okay, and that's thing. I think that's one thing we often like. The burning cabin, white people, house being attacked by Indians, white man comes in, saves white family, repulses the savages. That's the portrayal. Okay, we're not going to go too much longer today. We'll do one or two more slides. Now, this whole chapter is called the Gilded Age. I think I failed to mention that yesterday. But the Gilded Age really reflects this transformation and modernizing of America from a primitive colony, post-Civil War country that's slowly finding its way to now we are emerging as a major economic power. The era from 1870 to 1890 is known as the Gilded Age. It's the title of 1873 novel by Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner. Basically what the Gilded Age means, or gilded means, is you have gold outside layer. It looks pretty, looks awesome, but underneath there's a deceptive core. It's not as nice, it's dirty, it's grimy, so it's a false image. And so that's where the term gilded comes from, or the Gilded Age. Corruption of politics. Power of the new corporation seemingly immune to democratic policies. Basically, money could buy what you wanted. Control of Pennsylvania's legislature, the third house of railroad, by lobbyists who said to enjoy as much power as his elected members, because money bought them votes, bought them what they wanted. They could lobby for anything they wanted, and they got it. You also have corrupt political machines. Boss William Tweed helped the poor and controlled a lot of New York City, and what ultimately got him was, I think he ended up killing some people in the process, and so he'll eventually be arrested for corruption. But the whole point of this is people are trying to control aspects of America. The thing about Tweed was he was a bad man, but he actually helped the poor. Not to the Robin Hood degree, but like, hey, I'm going to get the sewage problem fixed. I'm going to get this building fixed, or I'm going to build a new housing complex. So Tweed would help those people that supported him. Now, obviously, he was corrupt, did a lot of bad things, but that appealed to several of the people, especially lower classes. Credit Mobiler Corporation of Union Pacific Railroad stockholders allowed them to get extremely rich, but ultimately, what's going to happen is these monopolies, these stockholders who are not, they're also called robin bearers, because they're not going to give back people that are going to buy stock, and they're not going to give stock money back. Basically, people are going to invest, not get anything back, but these people will get rich. They're going to go belly up, and it's going to cause an economic problem for the railroads later on. So this is the 1870s and the 1880s. And this is right at the onslaught, or the birth of Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel that would later become U.S. Steel. But the first major corporation before Rockefeller and Carnegie was the railroads. And that was really under Cornelius Vanderbilt. I don't know if we'll get to him as much. But this is really where you start to see businesses be very, very vicious. Okay, Gilded Age 2, the politics of dead center and government and the economy. We'll probably call this, well, we'll see how far we can get through here. Parties were closely divided, not that different from today. Republicans controlled the industrial North and Midwest and the agrarian West, where the Democrats dominated the South, did well among Catholics and Irish Americans in nation cities. Really not that different from today in some degree. Between 1876 and 1890, the margin separating the major candidates was less than 1%. There was 80% voter turnout, which is amazing. We're in the 50% voter turnout today. Gilded Age presidents made little effort to mobilize public opinion or extend executive leadership, and we often don't remember them. The only real one we remember is Grant, and because he was a general beforehand and famous in the Civil War, and maybe Garfield because he was executed, or not executed, but was assassinated. So the presidency is not very strong during this Gilded Age. Very weak presidents. Presidents made very little effort to mobilize public opinion or extend executive leadership. They're kind of just shells. But, in fact, the first election in which the Electoral College and the popular vote did not match was in the 1880s. Reform legislation. Oh, my bad. Government and the economy. Federal government was ill-prepared for the rapidly growing economy. We did not know how to deal with it. Republicans strongly supported a high tariff and had close ties to business interest, and they were very closely netted. In fact, when McKinley be elected in the 1890s, he was pretty much bought by Morgan, Rockefeller, and Carnegie and all the major powers or economic powers of the day. Democrats opposed the high tariff. In 1879, they'll return to the gold standard, the first time since the Civil War. Policy strongly favored the interests of Eastern industrials and bankers, hurt Western farmers, and the theme from the 1880s all the way even to the 1940s and 50s is farmers are going to be having difficulties. Okay, we got one more slide for today, and we're going to call it good after this one. Politics in the Gilded Age, number 3, if you're following along on a PowerPoint slideshow. Reform legislation. The Civil Service Act of 1883 created a merit system for federal employees of appointment via competitive examinations rather than political influence. This was an attempt to reform this now corrupt government and get away from people being appointed with jobs they had no experience for. Obviously, it still happens, but this was a good reform and desperately needed. The ICC was created to ensure that rates that railroad farmers charged farmers and merchants were reasonable and respectable and was fair and did not offer more favorable treatment to some shippers. I had a little effect on the railroads overall, though, but the whole point of this was the first real attempt to regulate any type of railroads or business. The Sherman Antitrust Act banned all combinations of practice that restrained free trade. It was too weak. This was an attempt to stop the trust, but it really is just too weak. It has no teeth. It's not to the Clayton Antitrust Act a generation later that will really make a difference in stopping some of this corruption. Political conflict in the states. Political ferment and conflict over the proper use of governmental authority were constantly raging. Greatly expanded responsibility for public health, welfare, and education will come to fore. Now, we don't have public education as a mainstay yet. This is still the very small education scheme. Welfare, public health, healthcare, stuff like that is very limited. It's not like it is today. And then farmers came together and the patrons of Husbury of Grange in 1867 to protest railroad practices. The big thing that they're going to create, and I think we'll get to it later, is what's known as the Populist Party. And the Populist Party will be born at this Grange, or this. A Grange is like a building. It can look like a church, but it's basically just a meeting place for locals to come. And that's going to lay the foundation for what's going to come later. So, just a little bit, this whole aspect, government is going to be corrupt. Politics is not going to be effective. There's going to be stalemates. Not really that different from the day to some degree. So it's very interesting and intriguing. Okay, this is where we're going to stop for today. Politics, the Gilded Age 3. If you have questions, please feel free to email me and let me know. And I will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good night, day.